Are you going to pay for that, or should I call security now? That was the first thing Malik heard before he even had a chance to respond. The 9-year-old black boy stood frozen in the middle of the toy aisle, holding a red and blue action figure still sealed in its box, just like every other toy on the shelf. He hadn't hidden it. He hadn't tried to run. He was doing what every kid does, looking, imagining, dreaming a little. But to Heather, a store associate in her 20s with a tight ponytail and a tighter attitude, Malik wasn't a child enjoying the toy section. He was a suspect. "I didn't take anything," he said softly, his voice barely louder than a whisper. "It's still on the shelf." Heather crossed her arms and narrowed her eyes. "I saw you acting sneaky. Don't play games with me. You people think you can walk around like you own the place." Those words hit harder than any accusation. Malik clutched the toy tighter, not because he was trying to steal it, but because he was scared. "I'm just waiting for my dad," he said. But Heather had already made up her mind. She reached out, grabbed his arm, and started pulling him toward the front of the store. It wasn't violent, but it was forceful enough to make heads turn. Customers looked up. One woman gasped. A man pulled out his phone. "I've got a shoplifting situation." Heather barked at the cashier radio mall security now. "Are you sure?" the cashier asked, hesitating. "He's just a kid." "Exactly," she snapped. And that's when they test limits. He was holding the toy like he was going to walk out with it, and no parent in sight. A few feet away, an older white woman spoke up. "Miss, maybe he's just playing." He didn't leave the aisle. Heather didn't even glance at her. "We have protocols for this kind of behavior." The woman's expression changed. "This kind of behavior, or this kind of child." Heather ignored the comment and continued dragging Malik toward the front. The boy's face turned red with embarrassment as more people began to stare. Some looked concerned, others just watched. Not a single employee intervened. Malik's voice cracked as he tried to explain. "My dad is here. He's on the phone." I wasn't going to steal it, but his words didn't matter. Heather's mind was already made up. When they reached the front of the store, she positioned Malik in front of the register like a captured fugitive. "You stay right here," she said sharply. "We'll let the police sort it out." Malik's eyes welled up with tears. Not because he was guilty, but because he was humiliated. That's when his father showed up. Darius Lewis, a tall, composed black man in his late 40s wearing a crisp button-down and khakis, stepped around the corner with a calm but concerned look. "Malik," he called. Malik's head shot up. Dad Darius walked quickly toward his son. "What's going on here?" Heather stepped in front of him, holding out her hand. "Sir, you'll need to wait. This boy was caught attempting to shoplift. This boy," Darius said slowly, "is my son." "Well," Heather stammered, "we found him holding a toy and acting suspicious." Darius looked at Malik, then at the toy, then back at Heather. "He was holding a toy in a toy store. Without a parent nearby," she added. "So you assumed he was stealing." Heather folded her arms. "We don't have time to investigate every kid who walks in here unsupervised. We have policies, and I followed them." Darius's eyes narrowed. "Did you check the cameras?" "We didn't need to," she said quickly. "I saw enough." Darius stayed still for a moment, then reached into his back pocket not for a wallet, but for a slim black leather ID case. He flipped it open slowly and held it up just enough for the name to be seen. "Darius Lewis, Executive Property Director, North Side Mall, Holdings." The cashier leaned forward, eyes widening. Heather blinked. What is that supposed to mean?" Darius looked her dead in the eyes. It means you just dragged the son of the man who owns this entire mall to the front of the store and accused him of theft with no evidence. Silence fell. The room went still. The cashier stepped back. The woman from earlier let out a low, "Oh my God!" Heather's face drained of color. I didn't know. Exactly, Darius said calmly. You didn't ask. You didn't listen. You just saw a little black boy with a toy and assumed the worst. Malik looked up at his father, unsure if he should cry or smile. Darius put a hand on his son's shoulder, steady and proud. You did nothing wrong. Then he turned to Heather. You, on the other hand, just made a very big mistake. Heather stood speechless, blinking at the ID in Darius's hand as if trying to process what it meant. Around her, the air in the store grew heavier, as though everyone present was holding their breath. The cashier stopped what he was doing. A teenage customer put their phone down. Even the ambient music seemed to fade into silence. Darius didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The title on the ID said everything. Executive Property Director, Northside Mall Holdings. This wasn't just a man defending his son. This was the man who signed off on leases, oversaw compliance reports, and had the power to shut down retail space with a single phone call. And Heather had just manhandled his child in front of half the store. I didn't know, she stammered. Had I known who you were. You would have treated him differently, Darius asked. Is that how this works? Kindness and decency are reserved for people with titles. Heather's mouth opened, but no words came out. Before she could respond, the front doors slid open with a whoosh. 2 security officers entered, both in uniform, one carrying a radio. The older one, a tall black man with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes, stopped as soon as he saw Darius. Mr. Lewis, he said, his tone shifting from procedural to respectful in an instant. Everything okay here, sir? Heather's head whipped around. Wait, you know him? The younger guard leaned in to whisper. That's the guy who owns the property. Heather, the whole mall. Darius nodded slightly to the senior guard. We're fine now, Tony. I've got it handled. Tony gave him a slow, knowing nod, then turned to his partner. Let's stand by near the door. This is above our pay grade. As the guards backed away, the tension thickened. Heather was pale now, her posture crumbling. The manager of the toy store came hurrying from the back, his tie crooked and face flushed. What's going on out here? He asked, clearly annoyed until he saw Darius. Then his face changed completely. Mr. Lewis, I had no idea you were here. Darius offered him a look that was calm, but unmistakably firm. Neither did your staff. That's the problem. The manager looked at Heather, then at Malik, then at the cluster of silent customers who had witnessed everything. He fumbled for words. We'll get this straightened out right away. Heather, maybe step into the back office for now. Heather looked as though she wanted to disappear. Without a word, she walked away slowly, her steps heavy with humiliation. Malik gripped the toy in his hands, still not fully understanding what had just happened, but knowing the pressure in his chest was beginning to ease. Darius knelt next to him and adjusted the collar of his shirt. You right, son? Malik nodded. I didn't do anything wrong. I know, Darius said, brushing a hand gently across his back. That's why I'm here. Standing up again, he addressed the room, not shouting, not scolding, but speaking with the quiet authority of a man who had seen too much to be surprised anymore. This happens more often than you think. A child being misjudged because of how he looks, a father being questioned because he doesn't fit the image of wealth, a family being shamed because someone decided they didn't belong, but today you did it to the wrong child. His words hung in the air, impossible to escape. He turned back to the store manager. I want to see your internal footage full playback, and I want incident reports filed not by your employees but by the customers who watch this unfold. The manager nodded quickly. Absolutely. We'll cooperate fully. Darius glanced at his watch, then back at Tony. Can. You escort my son and me to the admin level. We've got a lot to discuss upstairs. Of course, Tony said, immediately, stepping forward. He gently waved the young guard to open a private door leading to the employee hallway. As Darius and Malik walked through the crowd in the store, quietly parted. No one said anything. No one needed to, because they all understood what they had just seen. Not just a man protecting his son, but a man exposing a culture that had allowed this moment to happen in the first place. Outside the store, a teenage girl who had been recording for the past 5 minutes stopped her video and posted it to her page with one caption, "This is what real power looks like." Darius and Malik moved through the back hallway with Tony by their side, the noise of the mall behind them fading. Malik looked up at his dad. They thought I was stealing because I didn't look rich. Darius didn't flinch. They thought you didn't matter. But they were wrong. What happens now? Malik asked. Darius gave him a steady look. Now we make sure they never forget who you are and what you deserve. The elevator doors opened sleek and silver, revealing a floor few customers ever saw. As they stepped in, Darius pulled out his phone and typed one short message. Code 9. Immediate review. Call a boardroom. Because the real conversation hadn't even started yet. The elevator rose quietly, gliding past the noise and neon of the mall below. Malik stood beside his father, still holding the toy, his knuckles slightly white, the remnants of fear not yet gone. Darius stood tall, silent, calm, but beneath that silence was precision, focus, resolve. When the doors opened onto the executive level, it was like entering another world. The floor was quieter, the lighting softer, and the energy more measured, controlled. A receptionist behind a curved glass desk stood immediately upon seeing him. Mr. Lewis, they're ready in conference room 3. Darius gave her a polite nod, then glanced down at Malik. Come with me. The two walked side by side down a carpeted hallway lined with abstract art and framed photos of mall openings, ribbon cuttings, charity events. In each photo, Darius stood smiling with community leaders, store owners, and partners. He wasn't just an investor here. He was the heartbeat behind what Northside Mall had become over the past 15 years. But right now, it wasn't about past accomplishments. It was about the failure they'd just witnessed in real time. One that happened not in a spreadsheet or quarterly report, but in the eyes of his son. In the conference room, 3 members of his executive team were already seated. There was Ms. Park from Tenant Relations, Gerald from Legal, and Renee from PR. They looked up as Darius entered, expressions tense but attentive. They had seen the footage. They had read the urgent Code 9 text. They knew something serious had happened, but they hadn't expected it to be so personal. Darius nodded toward a plush chair by the window and helped Malik settle in with his tablet and a bottle of water. Then he shut the glass doors behind him, turned to the table, and didn't waste a second. You've seen the video. You've seen how fast it happened. So tell me, how many times do you think that same kind of thing has happened in our mall without a phone camera capturing it? No one answered. I want every customer complaint from the last 2 years pulled, especially any involving staff behavior profiling or policy misunderstandings. And I don't want summaries, I want full transcripts, raw footage, and outcomes. Ms. Park nodded, flipping to an open tablet. We'll get started immediately. Good, Darius said, because what happened to my son isn't unique. It's not even surprising. It's just the first time it happened to the wrong family on the wrong day. He turned slightly, looking out the window toward the atrium below. I built this place to be a space for everyone. You all know that I've said it in every strategy session, every community briefing. But today, my own child was treated like a criminal while doing nothing but being a kid. So now I have to ask, what are we really building if people like him aren't safe here? Gerald leaned forward. The store has already suspended the employee, HR is handling the internal report, and we're drafting a formal apology. Darius cut in, not harshly, but firmly. An apology won't mean anything unless it comes with structure. Policy accountability. He pulled out a folded document from his coat pocket, his original mall charter, the one he wrote 15 years ago before ground was even broken. Read this out loud, he said, handing it to Renee. She hesitated, then read the opening paragraph aloud. Northside Mall exists not just to serve, but to reflect its community. No guest shall feel unseen. No shopper shall be judged by their appearance. Every child shall feel safe to dream here. Her voice cracked slightly by the end. Darius nodded. That wasn't branding. That was a promise. He let the silence settle in before speaking again. Starting this week, I want every store manager retrained in conflict, de-escalation, and bias response, not optional mandatory. I want a new code of conduct signed by every employee, no matter how new or how senior. I want secret shoppers chosen from real community members, black, brown, young, old, immigrant, disabled, to walk these halls and report their honest experiences anonymously. Park was already typing. Renee had tears in her eyes, and from now on, Darius continued. We do not tolerate vague language in incident reports. No more acting suspicious, unless there's proof. No more standard protocol, if that protocol humiliates a child. If someone uses power to shame a guest, especially a child, they will not be protected here. Gerald raised a hand. Do we want to make a public statement? There's buzz building online. We don't chase the narrative, Darius replied. We own it. He looked at them all one by one, but not with a sound bite, not with a photo op, with action. Just then, Malik looked up from the tablet. Dad. Yeah, buddy, Darius walked over. Am I in trouble? Not even close, he said, kneeling. You did everything right. Malik nodded, then looked around the room. Is this your office? One of them, Darius said, smiling. But you're the boss today. Malik grinned and held up the robot toy. Can I still keep him? Darius chuckled. You better, after everything that happened. I think he belongs to you now. As the room softened, Darius stood again. All right, let's get to work. Full report, policy draft, community partner outreach. And I want a formal letter from the mall, not to the media, but to every family who shops here. Let them know we saw what happened, and we're fixing it. He led Malik toward the door, placing a firm hand on his son's back. And tell security, he added before leaving. No one harasses another child in this building, not while my name's still on the lease. Then he walked out, leaving behind a room not filled with fear, but with purpose. The breakdown had begun, and with it, the rebuilding. Word spread faster than anyone expected. By the time Darius and Malik had left the executive floor and stepped back into the main level of the mall, the story had already started to ripple across social media. The video, a 5-minute clip recorded by a teenage girl who had witnessed everything, was being shared with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like, and they messed with the wrong dad." People weren't just reacting to the humiliation of a child. They were responding to the calm, composed power of a father who didn't yell, didn't threaten, but simply stood his ground and used his position to demand something better. By nightfall, the clip had hit 10,000 views. By morning, it had crossed into 6 figures. But Darius didn't chase headlines. He didn't call the press or issue a flashy statement. He let the story speak for itself and focused instead on what came next. That very next morning, a formal notice was issued from Northside Mall Holdings. The toy store where the incident had occurred would be closed for 72 hours for internal review and mandatory retraining of all staff. Heather, the employee who had dragged Malik to the front of the store and accused him of theft, had already been suspended without pay pending investigation. Her manager, who had failed to intervene or correct the situation until it was too late, had been reassigned to off-site administrative duties indefinitely. But the consequences went far beyond a single store. Under Darius's order, every retailer inside the mall, over 130 stores in total, received a directive mandating bias training, customer de-escalation workshops, and the immediate adoption of a new code of conduct designed to protect all patrons, especially children and minorities, from public embarrassment and profiling. It wasn't an empty memo. It came with teeth. Stores were warned that non-compliance would result in penalties, contract re-evaluation, and potential removal from the property. This wasn't corporate theater. It was structural reform. Still, Darius knew real change wasn't about top-down orders. It was about culture. So instead of staying behind glass walls, he walked the floor every morning, every evening, not as an owner, not in a tailored suit, not surrounded by assistants or cameras, just as a father, a man. Someone who could pass by unnoticed and see who got smiled at and who got ignored, and things began to shift. Not perfectly, not instantly, but unmistakably. Employees who used to stare past teenagers in hoodies started asking, "Hey, you doing okay?" Security guards made a habit of saying hello before saying, "Move along." Some of the older staff, the ones who had worked retail long before, diversity policies became buzzwords, shared stories of how they'd been treated growing up and why that couldn't happen on their watch anymore. Meanwhile, the store that had caused the incident underwent more than a surface-level reset. When it reopened 3 days later, it had a new manager, a new layout, new policies, and a new sign near the entrance that read, "We welcome curiosity. We treat every child with respect." It wasn't a marketing slogan. It was a reminder. 1 week after the event, Malik returned to the store with Darius. Not to prove a point, just because he wanted to pick out a second toy. It was quiet when they entered, but the energy had changed. Staff stood a little straighter. Smiles seemed a little more sincere. A young employee knelt down and greeted Malik with a soft, "You like superheroes?" Malik nodded. "I like the ones who don't wear capes." Darius smiled. "He gets that from me. They didn't linger. They didn't lecture. They just bought the toy, said, 'Thank you,' and walked out. No one mentioned Heather. No one needed to. Her absence was less important than the presence of something new: accountability. Throughout the mall, signs of progress emerged. A black grandmother was helped by 3 employees while shopping for a stroller. A teenager with a stutter was treated with patience at the phone kiosk. A Spanish-speaking father received translated materials at the bank branch. Little things, quiet things. But they added up. And in the back office, Darius kept pushing. He launched a community feedback portal allowing guests to anonymously report issues, share stories, good or bad, and suggest improvements. He invited local civil rights organizations to host listening sessions for store managers. He even offered incentives for staff members who were highlighted in customer reviews for empathy and respect. It wasn't about punishment. It was about raising the bar. Tyler, a shift supervisor at the toy store who had once defended Heather's approach, pulled James, the interim lead, aside during a break and said quietly, "I think I get it now. It's not about being soft. It's about seeing people." James nodded. That's the difference between policy and principle. For the first time in a long time, people working at Northside weren't just following rules. They were remembering why the rules existed in the first place. And that Darius thought as he stood by the atrium railing one afternoon, watching a young girl pick out her first doll, was the real consequence. Not fear, not lawsuits, not scandal, but awareness, growth, a shared responsibility, and the quiet, powerful understanding that the next time a child like Malik walked through those doors, they wouldn't be walking alone. The shift didn't announce itself with banners or press releases. It showed up in the smallest moments, the ones that used to pass unnoticed. One morning, just a week after the store reopened, a group of local teens, 3 black boys, a Latina girl, and a kid wearing a hijab, wandered into the mall after school, laughing and joking, their backpacks slung over one-shoulder sneakers, squeaking softly on the polished floor. Normally, they would have stayed near the food court, close enough to be seen, but far enough to avoid attention. But that day, something was different. They walked into the toy store, and instead of side eyes or forced smiles, they were met with a genuine greeting from a young employee who had recently finished the new bias training program. "Hey, y'all," she said, "not rehearsed, not robotic. Let me know if you want to check out anything up close. No judgment, no hovering, just an invitation." One of the teens paused, looked at his friend, then whispered, "Yo, they never used to talk to us like that." The employee didn't hear him, but the moment mattered, because it meant something was working, not just the policy, but the intention. In the weeks that followed, more of those moments began to stack up. A woman in her 60s shared on Facebook how her autistic grandson was treated with patience and kindness by a shoe store clerk who knelt down and tied his laces for him. A Spanish-speaking father posted a thank you note in the mall's new customer feedback portal after a tech store employee used a tablet translator to explain a warranty policy in his language without rolling his eyes once. These weren't PR stunts. They were human corrections, quiet repairs to what had been broken. The training that Darius mandated wasn't performative either. It was immersive. Associates practiced real scenarios, some drawn from Malik's experience, others from anonymous community reports. They learned how to slow down, how to listen without defensiveness, how to see the human being before the transaction. There were still skeptics. One store supervisor muttered under his breath during a training session, "What are we supposed to apologize every time someone feels offended?" But he stopped talking when a grandmother stood up and said, "I just want my grandkids to grow up in a world where their skin doesn't make them guilty." First, silence fell, and for once it stayed long enough to mean something. Meanwhile, James, the interim lead, Darius had quietly promoted, continued to lead by presence, not position. He walked the floor daily, checked in with staff, asked them what they needed, and actually listened. He kept his door open and his ego low, and people responded. Even Tyler, who had once stood awkwardly at Heather's side during the confrontation with Malik, began to change. One afternoon, he pulled James aside near the break room. "I used to think this stuff didn't matter." He admitted, "I thought we were doing fine until I saw that kid's face." James didn't shame him. He just nodded. "What you do now is what matters." From that moment on, Tyler became one of the most consistent voices in the store's culture. Reset. Volunteering to mentor new hires, sitting in on extra training sessions, even helping translate signage to make the space more welcoming. Darius noticed, of course, but he didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because the shift wasn't about praise, it was about ownership. He kept walking the floor unannounced, blending in with customers, watching how employees moved when they thought no one important was watching. And what he saw gave him hope. A janitor offered to help an elderly couple carry a stroller up the escalator. A cashier took the time to explain every line on a receipt to a confused veteran without rushing him. A group of middle school kids were allowed to test gaming controllers in the electronics store without being hovered over like suspects. Each moment wasn't huge, but each was a piece of something bigger, and they were starting to add up. One day, Malik came back to the mall with a school friend. He pointed to the toy store and said, "That's where it happened." His friend looked confused. "Where what happened?" Malik paused, then shrugged. "Doesn't matter. It's different now." And it was Darius, standing across the atrium watching them, felt something settle in his chest. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't closure. It was momentum, a turning point. The shift hadn't been loud, but it had been real. And it was spreading through attitudes, through actions, through the simple decision to see people more clearly than before. Because in the end, what Darius had built wasn't just a mall. It was a community, one that had forgotten itself for a moment, but was remembering now, one person at a time. 2 weeks after the incident, Darius stood quietly at the far end of the mall's atrium, not as an executive, not as a property director, but as a father. The chaos had settled. The policies were in motion. The staff had adjusted. But Darius knew something was still missing: the moment to reflect, to explain not what had happened, but why it mattered. That morning, he gathered the store managers, tenant representatives, and a handful of staff and community leaders into the community space on the second floor, a glass-walled room overlooking the heart of the mall. There were no cameras, no podium, just folding chairs, a circle and a man with something to say. Darius didn't lecture. He didn't read from notes. He simply stood there, hands folded, and looked at the faces in front of him. Young and old, black, white, Latino, Asian. Some he'd hired. Some he'd had to discipline. Some he barely knew. And then he began. "This isn't about a toy," he said quietly. "It's about what that toy represented when it was in the hands of my son and what it cost him to be seen holding it." The room was silent. "My son was humiliated for doing what every child is supposed to do in a place like this. He wasn't breaking anything. He wasn't hiding. He was dreaming. That's what malls used to be, a place where people came to imagine a little more for themselves. A better outfit, a gift for someone they love, a toy they'd save up for. But when that dream gets met with suspicion instead of welcome, we haven't just failed a customer. We've failed the reason we exist." He walked slowly to the center of the circle, his voice low but steady. "I built this place to be more than polished glass and retail leases. I built it so families like mine wouldn't have to second-guess whether they belonged. But what happened to my son reminded me, belonging isn't a building. It's a behavior. It's not something we hang on the wall. It's something we show in the smallest, quietest ways. One of the managers nodded eyes down. A younger staff member wiped a tear quickly from the corner of her eye. Darius let the moment sit. Then finally he said what he came to say. Kindness is free, but the absence of it can cost everything. A child's joy, a parent's trust, a store's reputation, and sometimes even more. He stepped back and looked at them all. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be present. See the people in front of you, hear them. Honor their dignity, even when they don't look like you, sound like you, or buy what you expect. He paused, then added, we can build something better here, but only if we do it together. As he turned to leave, one of the employees, someone who hadn't spoken the entire meeting, raised a hand. Mr. Lewis, she said gently, I've worked here 5 years. I've never seen a boss show up like this. Darius smiled faintly. That's not a mistake I'll make again. And with that, he walked out. Not with applause, not with fanfare, but with the quiet certainty that something lasting had begun. Not because he demanded change, but because he modeled it. What happened to Malik was more than a misunderstanding. It was a mirror. A quiet reminder that respect should never have to be earned, and certainly not by a child. Darius didn't come in to make a scene. He came in to protect his son. But in doing so, he exposed a truth that's all too common. Sometimes people aren't seen for who they are until they hold power. And that needs to change. If this story moved you even just a little, take a moment. Reflect on how we treat each other when no one's watching. Share this story if you believe others need to hear it. Leave a comment if you've ever experienced or witnessed something like this. And if stories like these matter to you, consider subscribing. We'll keep telling them. Because real change doesn't start with outrage. It starts with understanding one story at a time.